In this video and the next, we're going to be talking about healthcare and specifically whether or not healthcare is a right, whether society has some sort of obligation or duty to provide healthcare for everyone, whether they can afford it or not. Kai Nielsen is the first author we'll be looking at. He argues that not only should societies like ours provide healthcare for everyone, regardless of their ability to pay for it, but the very existence of a multi-tiered healthcare system is immoral. In the next video, we'll look at arguments from Tristram Engelhardt, who argues that there is no right to healthcare. So society does not have any sort of natural obligation to provide healthcare for people who need it. And in fact, to eliminate multiple tiers of healthcare in our society where people who are wealthy can get better care, to erase all that would be a type of theft, or it would be an immoral act at the very least. So again, Nielsen today arguing that there is a kind of right to healthcare. Society ought to provide healthcare to everyone. And Engelhardt in the next video is going to argue that there is no such right to healthcare. Society does not have any sort of natural obligation to divvy out healthcare to everyone. Nielsen's two major claims in his essay, though, are this. First, that societies like ours should provide healthcare for all. And secondly, that multi-tiered systems of healthcare are unjustified in a moral sense. So again, Engelhardt is going to argue the exact opposite in both cases in the next video, but we'll get to that later. Regarding the first major claim, that societies like ours should provide healthcare for all, here's the main argument that Nielsen presents. We might call it an argument from autonomy and equality. The first premise just says, societies like ours value individual autonomy. As Nielsen puts it, we want a world in which as many people as possible have as full as is possible control over their own lives. In other words, if our society values personal autonomy, the ability to be self-governing, to make your own decisions about your life, how to live your life, then it seems like a good thing. It seems like an ideal that as many people as possible can be as free as possible to live however they want to live. And again, personal autonomy is going to be restricted in cases where you interfere with the rights of other people, but within those constraints, within the constraints of saying you can live your life however you see fit so long as you don't interfere with anybody else's life, Nielsen is just saying our society tends to think that's a good thing, that personal freedoms are a good thing. Second, though, Nielsen argues that maximizing individuals' autonomy requires a commitment to bringing about what he calls equality of condition. So equality of condition, what Nielsen is talking about here is material resources, money, finances, those sorts of things, but also political power. He's going to try to argue that to make as many people autonomous as possible, everyone has to be equal in terms of their money, their finances, their resources, their access to healthcare. All of that has to be as equal as possible. So here's what Nielsen says. Roughly equal material resources or powers are not things which are desirable in themselves, but they are essential instrumentalities for the very possibility of equal well-being, and for as many people as possible having as thorough and as complete a control over their lives as is compatible with this being true for everyone alike. What he's saying is, if you want every person, every individual to be maximally free, we have to make sure that everyone has the same sort of resources as everyone else. Nielsen continues, liberty cannot flourish without something approaching this equality of condition, and people without autonomous lives will surely live impoverished lives. The basic idea here is if our society cares about people being as free as is possible to live their lives as they see fit, if we want to bring that about, we have to make sure that everyone has the same sort of resources as everyone else. So if you don't have food, if you don't have shelter, if you don't have access to healthcare, you're not going to be able to live your life as you see fit because you're constantly going to be struggling to just survive. So Nielsen thinks if a society really cares about autonomy and wants to enable its citizens to live freely, that society has to make sure that those citizens have all of their needs met. So this is just premise 3. If our society values autonomy, then it must become committed to bringing about equality of condition. And equality of condition is, among other things, just meeting everyone's needs insofar as is possible. So equality of condition involves meeting people's needs. It's important to ask the question of what even counts as a need. Nielsen just identifies needs as those things that we must have to function well. And so there are basic needs that all people, or at least almost all people, must have to function well. These include needs pertaining to physical function, such as food and water, exercise, rest, a life-supporting environment, and whatever else is needed to keep the body intact or healthy, as well as social functioning, education, companionship, friendship, meaningful work, freedom from domination, freedom from harassment. Nielsen is saying that all of these things count as needs that every person has if they are to function well, if they are to flourish. Or as he puts it, these are basic needs we must have to live well. Back up a little bit. If these are the needs that everyone needs in order to live well, and society cares about making people as autonomous as possible, Nielsen is saying that to make people as autonomous as possible, you have to meet all of these needs insofar as you can. So society should be trying to meet all of these different needs for as many people as they can. So providing food, shelter, water, education, and healthcare, because that's something that's required to keep the body healthy and intact. Now, it's important to point out too, just because you meet everybody's needs doesn't mean you give the same thing to everyone. There are going to be people who don't really ever need to go to the doctor, who manage to stay healthy without having to ever go to the hospital, without ever having to see a medical professional at all. Those people don't need access to healthcare. It's there if they need it, but just because of how their lives are, they just don't use it. On the other hand, there are going to be people who are constantly in and out of the hospital, who need to see lots of specialists, and the idea is if we meet both of these individuals' needs, the person who never needs to go to the doctor and the person who's at the doctor all the time, we just give them specifically what they need as individuals. This is different from giving them the exact same thing. So it's not the case that Nielsen is saying the government should give everyone like $1,000 to take care of their health expenses. What he's saying is everyone, whatever their needs are, those needs should be met. Those who have greater needs are going to get more from the government or from society, and those who have fewer needs are going to get less from the government or from society. But the point is, whatever your needs are, the government meets it, and this is all in the service of promoting autonomy. Meeting the needs of individuals, this is about trying to make people as free as possible. If their needs aren't met, they're not going to be able to live life as they see fit. We value helping people live lives as they see fit, and so we should provide for people's needs. Nielsen sums it up by saying, the goal or the underlying aim should be to meet the healthcare needs of everyone and meet them in this sense explicated equally. Everybody's needs here should be met as fully as possible. Different treatment is only justified where the need is different or where both needs cannot be met. The idea is whatever a person's needs are, society has some sort of duty or obligation to meet those needs so long as it cares about promoting the autonomy of its citizens. And because some people have greater needs than others, this means those with greater needs are going to receive more from society, those with fewer needs are going to receive less. But that doesn't really matter. That's not unjust because everyone is equal in that whatever their needs are, they're being met. In terms of practicality, how do we put this into motion? How do we build a society or a medical system that meets everybody's needs insofar as is possible? Nielsen has a lot of ideas about this. He suggests that any type of entrepreneurship or market is eliminated from healthcare. So doctors need to put on government set salaries. There needs to be a single tier of healthcare where everyone has access to the same type of healthcare, the same type of doctors, same type of specialists, and an elimination of for-profit insurance companies. So the entire market associated with healthcare, whoever's making money on healthcare, that needs to stop, and healthcare needs to be reformed as a kind of service to promoting human health rather than a business in which people are profiting. So any sense of the market, any sense of profiting from healthcare, all of that needs to be scrubbed from the healthcare system, and the healthcare system needs to be designed specifically for promoting and preserving health of citizens. In terms of how to distribute resources, Nielsen has these ideas about we can look at the different talent levels with respect to doctors and nurses and make sure that that's distributed equally across the country. So we avoid situations where all the talented doctors are clustered in one particular city or one particular state. What this would mean then is that doctors are going to be forced to move to various places in order to make sure that everyone has access to comparable doctors. Nielsen wants to avoid the possibility that all the good doctors end up in one place, and because of that, we're going to make sure that the good doctors are spread out across the country. The same sort of thing goes with technology, where an assessment is made in advance how much technology each region of the country needs, and then that technology is distributed in terms of where it's needed most across the country. But the point being, what Nielsen wants is to make sure that the product that people get when they receive healthcare is essentially equal. Whatever their needs are met, and their needs are met by the same quality of doctors using the same technology, the same techniques. Everything has been universalized or evened out. One serious problem here that people often raise is that if you're going to do this, if you're going to completely revamp the healthcare system so it's no longer a business or a for-profit sort of institution, and now it's entirely taking care of people whether they can pay or not, who's going to pay for that? Where's the money coming from? In other words, it's going to be incredibly expensive to try to meet literally everyone's needs insofar as is possible. And where's that money coming from? Nielsen just kind of outright dismisses this concern. He says governments understandably worry about mounting healthcare costs. This is slightly ludicrous in the United States given its military and space exploration budgets, but is also a reality in Canada and even in Iceland, where there is no military or space budget at all. There should, of course, be concern about containing health costs, but this can be done effectively with a state-run system. Nielsen is really making two major claims here. One, the people who are worried about the cost of universal health care are just prioritizing spending in a bad sort of way. So too much money is going to the military, too much money is going towards space exploration, things like that. And that money should just be diverted away from those projects and put into healthcare. Nielsen is saying the money's there, it's just being used in the wrong sorts of ways. The second claim that Nielsen is making is that a government-run healthcare system could operate in a cost-effective sort of way. So if the government's worried about spending too much money on healthcare, by giving the government complete control over healthcare, those costs would be easier to control. So the more government regulation you pile on, the more you can control the cost of things, and that helps with saving money as well. So again, he's saying the money's there, but it's being spent the wrong way, and once the system is put into place, the government will be able to operate in an efficient way where healthcare costs are going to be driven way down. I'll leave these sorts of considerations open for the time being. We can talk about them more. Whether you think this is a plausible proposal by Nielsen or not, we can talk about that online. Incidentally, in the next video, Engelhardt is going to make the argument that even if society could pay for the healthcare costs of everyone, there's no obligation that they do so, but we'll get to that in the next video. Just to sum up though, Nielsen's first major point is that societies like ours that care about autonomy should provide healthcare for all. The idea being, if our society cares about autonomy, they should care about people being able to live their lives as they see fit, and the only way that you can maximize individuals' autonomy is to make sure that they have all of their needs met. If your needs are not met, you can't live your life as you see fit. You're going to be struggling to meet your needs constantly. So your liberties are going to be drastically reduced. If we care about promoting personal liberty, we need to make sure that people have their needs met. And healthcare is one of those needs. So why think that our society should provide healthcare for all? Because this is what's required if we're going to promote personal autonomy. Now, the second major claim that Nielsen makes is that multi-tiered systems of healthcare are unjustified. As he puts it, open and free medical treatment of the same quality and extent should be available to everyone in the society. No 2- or 3-tier system should be allowed to obtain, and treatment should only vary on the basis of variable needs and unavoidable differences in different places in supply and personnel. What he's saying then is that because of equality between persons, every person is equal, no one person should get better care than another. In a 2-tier system, we might have a basic level of healthcare, which is just covering basic healthcare needs, checkups, preventative care, those sorts of things, and then an upper tier that takes care of extra things, elective surgeries and other sorts of procedures that might improve quality of life but aren't necessary for survival. Nielsen is saying that this type of system where there's a difference in the levels of healthcare that people can receive based on finances usually is unjust. It treats some people as though they're more important or more valuable than others. But if people are truly equal, then they should gain access to the exact same care. No one person should get better care, better health care than another, insofar as is possible. With that in mind then, the major argument that Nielsen gives here is that all lives matter equally, so there's no person who's more valuable than another, differences in terms of age or race or religion or whatever, none of that matters, or differences especially in terms of wealth, that doesn't affect a person's value either. So all persons are treated as equal regardless of their ability to pay for healthcare or not. Secondly, if all people are genuinely equal, then no individual should receive better healthcare than any other individual. As Nielsen puts it, each person's health needs should be the object of equal societal concern, since each person's good should be given equal consideration. What he's saying here is, helping each individual to flourish, every individual should count equally. So society should be just as interested in helping each individual flourish, regardless of any sort of difference in our wealth or background or education or anything like that. On the other hand, if we don't allow people to receive equal health care, those who get better health care, it seems as though they're being treated as they're more valuable or more important than those who don't have access to the same quality of care. Because of this, the third premise, it just follows that no individual should receive better health care than any other. And furthermore, if multi-tiered systems are allowed, then some individuals will receive better health care than others. After all, if we have a low tier of health care that just takes care of basic needs, survival, and an upper tier of health care which takes care of everything else, the people with the finances to get the upper tier are going to get better treatment than those who only get the lower tier. That's the kind of thing that violates equality, according to Nielsen. And so it just follows that we must not allow multi-tiered healthcare systems. To sum up then, the idea is just that if you value people equally, promoting the good of every individual should be given equal weight. So every individual, what it takes to promote their good, that should be an equal interest to society. Society should be equally interested in promoting my good as promoting your good, and the same goes for every individual. And that just means we can't allow some people to get better health care than others, because to allow someone to get better health care than someone else means the person with access to the better care is more likely to have their needs met or is having their needs met with a greater quality, and that just creates inequality between people. Now, one last objection here is that people who have resources should be allowed to use those resources as they see fit. So if someone who's wealthy wants to pay extra to get better care, that's their right. It's their right to do with their property what they want. Nielsen responds to this type of argument by saying, there's no living in a society without some limitation on the freedom to do some things. The restrictions on the freedom of the medical profession and on patients that I'm proposing would make for both a greater liberty all around, everything considered, and as well for greater well-being in the society. What Nielsen is saying here is, yes, the system he proposes makes sure that people who are wealthy can't use that wealth, can't freely use that wealth to get better care. So people who are wealthy, people with resources, their liberties are being restricted. And Nielsen thinks that's reasonable because by restricting the freedoms of the wealthy, it's promoting greater freedom for everyone else. So Nielsen is just saying, yeah, I accept that. By saying wealthy people can't pay for greater levels of care, that takes away their freedoms. That's being done in the name of freedom, namely to promote the freedoms, the autonomy of everyone else insofar as possible. So he just thinks that by taking away the freedoms of a few people, we're maximizing the freedom of most people. And if our society cares about personal autonomy, cares about every individual equally, we should be invested in making sure that everyone lives as freely as possible, whether they're wealthy or not. Engelhardt, we'll see in the next video, is strongly opposed to this line of reasoning. So he goes so far as to call this type of system as thievery. It's stealing from people who are wealthy in the service of giving to those who are not. We'll get to that. We'll get to those types of arguments in the next video. For now, as always, here are some resources for you to look into if you're interested in continuing to read about healthcare and whether or not providing healthcare for all is some sort of obligation or duty of our society.